On the first day of the temporary ban on short selling, South Korean stocks were sharply up on Monday. Trading on the secondary Kosdaq had to be halted for a moment for the first time in more than 3 years. A homegrown air taxi has successfully made its test flight. That's open to the public for the first time, paving the way for more tests to come in urban skies starting next year. With this, Korea gains momentum for its ambitious urban air mobility project. San Diego Padres' Ha-seong wins the MLB Golden Glove for his defensive versatility, becoming the first Korean player to win that title. It's November 6, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. On the first day of the temporary ban on short selling, South Korean stocks were sharply up today, with Kospi surging well over 5% and Kosdaq more than 7%. Trading on the Kosdaq had to be halted for a moment in the morning. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin starts us off.
South Korean stocks jumped on Monday, the first day that the country temporarily banned short selling. According to the Korea Exchange, South Korea's benchmark index, the Kospi closed up 5.66%, while the secondary Kosdaq market rose 7.34%. This comes after the Financial Services Commission announced on Sunday it would impose a short-selling ban from Monday until at least June next year to prevent further massive losses by retail investors. And the upward trend was witnessed from the opening bell. The Korea Exchange said a sidecar limit was activated at 9:57 a.m. for 5 minutes when the Kosdaq 150 futures soared 6.02% from its previous close, and the Kosdaq 150 index jumped 7.3%. A sidecar limit is a trading curve that is activated when there is a rise of more than 6% compared to the previous close on the Kosdaq 150 futures, and when the Kosdaq 150 index rises 3% for more than a minute. This is the first time in 3.5 years that the sidecar has been activated. The gain was especially prominent in technology stocks, with secondary battery shares of EcoPro BM and EcoPro closing up 30% and 29% each. While this was largely owed to expectations that volatility in battery stocks would be lowered, it is uncertain how long this will last.
There is no guarantee that they will continue to rise in the long run. Those stocks rose because they're currently sensitive to government policies and changes in the market. It's also because the situation has changed quite suddenly.
The surge seen on Monday was also largely led by foreign investors. Unlike domestic institutions and retail individual investors who turned net sellers after the ban was announced, foreign investors bought local stocks. However, in the medium to long term, foreign investors may also turn into net sellers.
It hasn't even been a day yet, so this can't exactly be seen as a pattern. As of now, you can say that there are foreigners who expect stocks to go up, but who knows what will happen as time passes.
The expert added that investors need to continue using fundamental analyses to see which stocks and investors the short-selling ban will impact. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The major reasons that the Korean financial authorities had to put a temporary ban on stock short selling are illegal market practices by global investment banks. Correspondent Moon Hye-ryun takes a look at the effects and concerns of this break on the market.
Starting Monday, short selling is banned for all stocks listed on South Korea's stock markets until the end of June 2024. Short selling is when investors trade with borrowed shares in the hope that the price will fall later, so they can buy them back at a lower price and pocket the price difference. The ban comes following a report in mid-October that found 2 international investment banks engaging in naked short selling, which was cited by the Financial Services Commission in a press briefing as a reason for the ban. It also cited economic uncertainty such as the Israel-Hamas conflict, as well as the need to level the playing field for retail investors against large institutional investors. Following the ban, shares on the tech-heavy Kosdaq jumped by over 6% on Tuesday, prompting the activation of the Kosdaq sidecar curbs for the first time in nearly 3 years and a half. One expert had this to say about how the ban could affect the stock market.
It looks as though individual investors' funds are flowing into the market, which is leading to this rise, but it's difficult to predict how long this will last.
This is the fourth time that the country has banned short selling, but the first that financial authorities have ever suspended it without a worldwide financial crisis, such as the global financial crisis in 2008 or the COVID-19 pandemic. There are concerns about the possible ramifications of this unusual situation on the market in the future. The domestic short-selling market is also dominated largely by foreign investors, with the ratio of individual to institutional and foreign investors being at 2:98. As a result, it's expected that the ban will affect foreign investments in South Korean stocks.
There's a possibility that as institutions and foreign investors are unable to short sell, they also won't be able to keep up the same proportion of going long and therefore damage the soundness of the financial market.
As watchers remain wary, the FSC seeks to improve related rules and systems during the 8-month ban. The Commission said it will decide whether to resume short sales in consideration of its improvements. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Israel says the Gaza Strip has been divided into two separate parts, North Gaza and South Gaza. Also, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has crossed out chances of a ceasefire until all hostages return home. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
The Israel Defense Forces said Sunday that it had fully surrounded Gaza City and split Gaza into two. According to IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, the Gaza Strip is now split into North Gaza and South Gaza, adding that there are now widespread strikes on terror infrastructure below ground and above it. Hagari called the encirclement of Gaza City a significant stage in the war between Israeli forces and Hamas militants, as it's now able to pinpoint operations deeper within Gaza. Despite international calls for a humanitarian ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated on Sunday that there will be no ceasefire until all hostages are returned first.
I want you to know that there's one thing that we won't do. There won't be a ceasefire without the return of our hostages. Take it completely out of the lexicon. We say it to our enemies and to our friends, and we'll simply carry on until we win. We don't have an alternative.
Meanwhile, Iran warned Sunday that the U.S. will be hit hard if there is no ceasefire. According to the Iranian defense minister, Tehran's message to the Americans was to immediately stop the war in Gaza and implement a ceasefire without further elaborating on the repercussions. Iran considers the U.S. to be militarily involved in the armed conflict. The White House, on the other hand, says hostage negotiations are taking place and added that fighting may be paused to ensure their safe movement. Speaking to CBS on Sunday, Deputy National Security Advisor Jonathan Feiner said negotiations are taking place quietly behind the scenes and that Washington believes there is an opportunity to release a significant number of hostages. When asked if Israel would agree to a ceasefire, Feiner added that the U.S. will work hard to make it happen. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Over the weekend, North Korea designated next Saturday as Missile Industry Day, and South Korea's military remains alert as the regime could try another spy satellite launch attempt on that day. Bae Eun-ji has the details.
The South Korean military says it's keeping an eye on a possible third attempt by North Korea to launch its military satellite on November 18th, which Pyongyang has designated as Missile Industry Day to commemorate last year's successful test launch of its Ha-seong 17 ICBM.
North Korea has designated so-called Industry Day several times before, so we are closely monitoring and tracking the situation, taking various possibilities into account, including a possible provocation on one of those anniversaries.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff added that intelligence authorities of South Korea and the U.S. have been closely coordinating on the matter. Meanwhile, one expert noted that South Korea is also scheduled to send its own military spy satellite from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, with the help from Elon Musk's SpaceX on November 30th, and explained that this makes it risky for the North.
If North Korea makes an attempt to send its satellite, whether it be on November 18th or any time up through November 30th, and it doesn't succeed, then they could very likely be upstaged by South Korea.
But he added that North Korea will likely carry out a launch at some point, presumably before the end of the year. The North has failed twice in recent months to put a spy satellite into orbit. Immediately after it failed in its second attempt in August, Pyongyang announced that it would make a third attempt in October, but even into November still hasn't attempted a third launch. North Korea's satellite launch is seen as a disguised test of ballistic missile technology and is considered a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. 배은지, Arirang News.
As part of a follow-up to the Camp David summit, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan will launch a high-level consultative group on countering North Korean cyber activities that fund the regime's nuclear weapons and missile development programs. According to Seoul's presidential office on Monday, the decision comes after Second Deputy National Security Advisor In Sung-hwan met with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts last Tuesday. Under this framework, there will be quarterly meetings on this topic. A UN Security Council report says North Korea has conducted illegal cyber activities to gain funds, including cryptocurrency theft, stealing its largest amount ever last year. An air taxi has successfully made its test flight in the southern coastal county of Go-hung in Jeollanam-do province, which was open to the public for the very first time. This is paving the way for more tests to come in urban skies starting next year as part of Korea's urban air mobility project using domestic technology. Our business correspondent Ha-seong was there.
This air taxi takes off vertically from its vertiport and flies for about 5 minutes without carrying a person. Developed by the Korea Aerospace Research Institute and domestic firms, the KUAM OPUP can carry one person and fly at a speed of up to 240 kilometers per hour, generating less noise compared to a helicopter. It was the first public demonstration of the aircraft following a test run with a smaller size model 2 years ago. The demonstration was in line with the first stage of the Korean UAM demonstration project, known as the KUAM Grand Challenge, which kicked off in August to test the safety of urban air mobility aircraft as well as related infrastructure ahead of commercialization. Along with the flight demonstration in Go-hung, Jeollanam-do province, a vertiport, passenger terminal, traffic management system, and AI-based control tower were all unveiled, showcasing their safety and integrated operational capabilities.
The government will refine regulations tailored for UAM to create an environment where firms and researchers can develop technology without a hitch. I hope we can work together towards opening the urban sky by 2025.
In October, the Transport Ministry announced that the UAM Act had been given the green light at a plenary session of the National Assembly. This enactment lays down the groundwork for companies to actively develop technology and test out new services without being shackled down by the existing aviation laws.
Aviation regulations are extensive and strict, but electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft don't require the same level of standards. So, for UAM, we've excluded unnecessary existing rules, except those related to safety, although even some of those could be relaxed.
He added that the government plans to expand the use of UAM from transportation services to logistics, emergency care, and firefighting services. Companies that have demonstrated the safety of their technologies in the first stage of the KUAM Grand Challenge will move on to the second stage, which will take place in metropolitan area from next July for about a year. Ha-seong, Arirang News, Go-hung.
To improve commuting for people living outside of Seoul, the government is expediting the opening of GTX lines to the capital, with the first GTX-A from Dongtan Station to Suseol Station set to open next March. The announcement came as President Yoon Suk-yeol visited the GTX-A construction site, which connects Ha-seong City's Dongtan, about 30 kilometers south of the capital, to Suseol in Seoul's Gangnam-gu district. Noting this commute will be around 19 minutes when the line opens, Yoon said more lines will be opened faster, making Seoul reachable in 30 minutes from anywhere in the greater capital region. He added this will create economic opportunities as more people will be open to living outside of Seoul. The president said his government will ensure fares on these commuter trains will remain affordable. Over at the National Assembly, ruling and opposition parties alike are gearing up for the upcoming general election, now some 5 months away, as both the PPP and the main opposition DP put forth details on their election preparation committees on the same day. Our political correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
The ruling People Power Party officially launched a special committee on Monday that will be in charge of the so-called New City project, which aims to incorporate South Korea's northwestern Gimpo and other satellite cities around the metropolitan area into Seoul. Gimpo is currently part of Gyeonggi-do province, but with a growing population, the city may face division into two, as in North Gyeonggi and South Gyeonggi-do provinces. But the Gimpo City Council says it wants to be part of Seoul instead.
If we take into consideration that citizens of Gimpo already commute, live and enjoy cultural life in Seoul, it makes sense to match where they live to the appropriate administrative area.
However, the main opposition Democratic Party has heavily criticized the move, calling it a political tactic by the ruling party to bolster voter support ahead of the general election. Both the ruling and the main opposition parties also gave details on their general election planning committees the same day, with members including women and young people. They'll be in charge of preparing for next year's general election by coming up with tactics and strategies.
This election, as everyone knows, is more than a party issue. It's a watershed election that will determine the fate of our country. We'll do our best to guard against any arrogance that may exist within us.
Meanwhile, the opposition Justice Party's leader Lee Jeong-mi, as well as party leadership, resigned en masse, with Lee saying the decision was made to further solidify and expand the party. The Justice Party will now likely face next year's election by forging a political coalition with other third-party forces such as the Labour Party or the Green Party. Lawmakers across the parties have put their game faces on, with the general election coming up in about 150 days. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
G-Dragon, the leader of the K-pop group BIGBANG, appeared for his first police questioning on Monday over allegations of illegal drug use. Before entering the Incheon Metropolitan Police Agency, the 35-year-old singer, whose real name is Kwon Ji-young, told reporters that he did not commit any drug-related crimes and came to make that clear. The police will conduct a reagent drug test on Kwon and send his urine and hair samples to the National Forensic Service for detailed analysis. Last month, Kwon was booked for investigation on suspected drug use, which he's continuously denying. On the cultural front, K-pop artists won 3 trophies at this year's MTV Europe Music Awards, also known as the EMAs. BTS member Jungkook clinched Best K-pop and Best Song for his solo debut track 7, becoming the first Korean solo artist to win 2 awards at a single EMA. Boy group TXT was named Best Push or Best Breakthrough Artist. The winners were announced on the EMA website on Sunday, as the awards ceremony was canceled for the first time in 30 years due to the, quote, devastating events in Israel and Gaza. And Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. That means we have our sports editor, Paul Need, joining us in the studio. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Let's first start with baseball. Ha-seong has won something that no Korean has ever done before.
Yes, that's right. The MLB Golden Glove, basically an award for defensive players in the league. There have been Korean nominees before. Chu Shin-soo was nominated in 2012, but Kim's the first to actually win it. The San Diego Padres star was nominated at shortstop last year, but this year he wins for the utility spot, basically a player who can play in more than one defensive position. He was also nominated for second base, but the winners are decided via a vote by the 30 MLB managers as well as some coaches. Those votes account for 75% and the remaining 25% from the American Baseball Research Defensive Index. Kim won the award thanks to his defensive versatility and because he's among the best in terms of outs above average. Meanwhile, the World Series concluded on Friday with the Texas Rangers winning their first ever title.
Great stuff. And sticking with baseball, the KBO Korean Series gets underway this week. Who is involved?
Yes, it starts tomorrow in KT Wiz. They are through to the Korean Series. They beat the NC Dinos in the playoffs to make it that far. They'll play the LG Twins, who won the KBO regular season, of course. And this comes after a 3-2 win for KT Wiz on Sunday over the NC Dinos in Game 5 of the playoffs. It was an incredible comeback as well, with NC winning the first two matches, but KT then won 3-0, 11-2 and then 3-2 to seal their place in the Korean Series, which begins on Tuesday, weather permitting, of course. That will start at 6:30 p.m. at Jamsil Baseball Stadium in Seoul. KT Wiz are in the Korean Series for the second time in their short history. They actually won it in 2021. The Twins, though, are looking for a first win since 1994. A best-of-7 series will crown the winner.
All right, and moving on to football. There was a long-awaited Korean FA Cup win for Pohang Steelers.
Yeah, that's right. Again, 2013 was what Pohang were hoping for heading into the final. Well, history did indeed repeat itself as Pohang Steelers, just like they did 10 years ago, beat Jeonbuk to win the FA Cup. This time, though, it was at home at the Pohang Steelyard, with Pohang winning 4-2. Kim Sung-dae and Shin Kwang-hoon both started in the game and both played in that 2013 final. It was Pohang's first trophy in 10 years and their 5th FA Cup win overall. That puts them level with Suwon Blue Wings and Jeonbuk for the most titles. But on Saturday afternoon, Pohang actually came back from behind twice to win, from 1-0 and 2-1 down. But superb goals from Zeka, Han Chani, Kim Jong-woo and Hong Yun-san won it for the K-League Giants. The K-League season still has 3 games to go, and Pohang are also involved in the Asian Champions League with 3 group stage games to go in that competition as well.
Let's talk about short track speed skating. Gold and silver for South Korea at the ISU 4 continents.
Yes, gold in the men's relay team in the 5,000 metres and silver for the women in the 3,000 metre relay. And in Canada, in Quebec, the men's team of Park Ji-won, Kim Gun-woo, Lee Jung-min and Jang Sung-woo finished with a time of 7 minutes 13.143 seconds. The women's team of Lee So-yeon, Park Ji-won, Park Ji-yoon and Shim So-ki finished with a time of 4 minutes 14.567 seconds. There were also individual awards as well. Park Ji-won defended the men's 1500 metre title, winning the gold, and also won silver in the 1,000 metres.
And finally to tennis, Novak Djokovic. His incredible career got even better.
Yeah, a true icon of the sport. He's now the first person to win 40 Masters ATP 1000 titles. The 40th came on Sunday at the Paris Masters, beating Grigor Dimitrov 6-4, 6-3. The win also means that he has increased his lead over Carlos Alcaraz, which increases his chances of ending the year as the highest-ranked player for a record-extending 8th time. It was his 7th Paris Masters title overall.
All right, Paul Need, our sports editor. Nice roundup. See you next week.
Thank you. See you.
The first cold wave of the season will be seen with cold wave alerts in place for central regions. Tomorrow morning temperatures will plummet significantly. Seoul will see lows plunging to single figures at 3 degrees Celsius. This is about 13 degrees lower than today. Other regions such as Daegwallyeong and Yeongju will also see a huge plunge in the readings. Keep in mind that due to frigid wind chills, sensible temperatures will be in the negative territory. Showers will be coming and going until tomorrow dawn. Gangwon-do province will see 5 to 30 millimeters. The Seoul metropolitan area in Gyeongsangbuk-do province can expect about 5 to 20. Strong winds are in the forecast for most regions. Inland regions, including here in Seoul, have strong wind advisories in place tonight. For the coastlines of Gangwon-do province and the west coast, where warnings are issued, winds will be especially violent, gusting as fast as 30 meters per second. Cold mornings are expected for most inland regions tomorrow. Seoul will be starting off at 3 degrees, Daegu at 8 degrees Celsius. Highs in Seoul will get up to 10 degrees, Daejeon 13, Busan will be topping out at 17 degrees. Until Thursday, wide temperature gaps are expected, and for this weekend, clear skies will make a return. It's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session is coming up.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Completely new. But something anyone can relate with. Flawlessly made. The laughs and tears that go with it. K-drama. Korea is coming at you with another story to tell.
Music start! Do you remember my K-pop tour with Taeyeon last summer? Today, a special travel mate is joining me for this K-pop tour.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? I'm live.
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지. 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.
Hello everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Next week, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization, or APEC, will hold its leaders' meeting in San Francisco. Leaders from 21 APEC members will gather, and though the forum is operated on the basis of non-binding commitments, it will serve as a chance for members to promote regional economic integration. The highlight of this year would, of course, be a bilateral summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, though Xi is yet to confirm his attendance. What are they expected to discuss, and what would the summit mean for South Korea? For this, we invited Professor Im Eun-jung from Gwangju National University. Welcome, Professor Im.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. And we also have Professor Robert Kelly from Busan National University. Good to see you, Professor Kelly.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Hi, thank you for being with us. Now, first question to our Professor Im. Let's first tap into the background of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. For what purpose has this intergovernmental forum been established?
Well, APEC is a bit different from probably other international organizations because its aim is more generally for economic exchange or prosperity of the Asia-Pacific region with the longer-term vision of creating an Asian-Pacific community someday. It was again founded in November 1989 with the 12 founding members, including South Korea. The meeting was held in Canberra, Australia. And now, as you just explained, the members are 21. But interestingly, again, the APEC members are economy, not actually sovereign states. So they're not actually permitted to use the name country or fly the national flag. So thus, Taiwan or Hong Kong are referred to as the Chinese Taipei, quotation mark, and Hong Kong, China, respectively. Meeting between the APEC leaders are therefore called APEC economic leaders meetings, not the summits, and decisions are made by consensus and are it's not binding, as you just explained to, and emphasizing more like a voluntary participation or implementation by member economies.
All right, thank you for your explanation, Professor Im. Now, Professor Kelly, I'd like to ask you about the role it can play. The Asia-Pacific region has been actively pursuing new regional cooperation frameworks recently, including the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. As far as I know, RCEP excludes the U.S., while IPEF excludes China. And as a forum that includes both of the countries, in what ways could APEC be used to mitigate conflicts and promote free trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific region?
Yeah, actually, I think you really put your finger on it right there, right? It's one of the only bodies for the region that includes China and the United States, and that's really valuable strategically. I mean, it's really good for trade too, right? U.S. and China trade a great deal. Of course, they're kind of the primary trading relationship of the world economy, but it's also strategically pretty important, which is to say that the U.S. and China aren't actually interacting that much. Right. We know that Xi hasn't agreed yet, for example, to come to APEC. There haven't been a lot of sort of high-level meetings between the U.S. and China. There's been a real falling out over things like the South China Sea and the Ukraine war. And so this is actually a really good way to get elites in the region talking to each other. There are pretty serious political divisions in East Asia and sort of around the Pacific. And it's really good that you get all these people around the table. And particularly, I think this creates an opportunity for the president of China and the president of the United States to meet without sort of the kind of diplomatic dance of who invited who, and did someone sort of defer to the other by agreeing to some kind of meeting or something like that. You don't have those kinds of issues here. They can both sort of show up and say, this is kind of a part of our normal diplomacy, and then you can have a side meeting. I think the larger issue, though, what APEC is supposed to be about, trade is tricky, right? I mean, you've got a large number of members. They're very culturally diverse, right? APEC reaches from like Chile in South America through, Russia and down to sort of Australia. I mean, there's a huge number of very culturally and economically different countries. And so trying to get them all to agree to some kind of even mildly organized trade framework has been pretty hard, right? APEC's sort of heyday was in the 90s and it's kind of slipped away. And now I think it's sort of come back a little bit because it's a way for China and the U.S. to talk to each other. I think maybe the strategic issues might be outweighing the trade issues.
All right, I see. So APEC can indeed play a strategically important role. I see. Well, Professor Im, now to this year's 30th edition of APEC. The United States is hosting this year's under the theme of creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. What are the key agenda items that are going to be discussed?
Well, first of all, APEC, as Professor Kelly very well explained, is a natural arena or opportunity for both countries, again, the U.S. and the China together. And it is, again, the largest regional organization that represents, for example, like 60% of the whole global GDP, or like it covers 40% of the world's population. So it's very extensive, again, the framework that can deal with many different agenda. And having said that, again, this year's theme, as you just mentioned, is creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. So I think they are trying to, again, emphasize the importance of this specific framework, which is pretty much extensive. And open regionalism is a content principle that is unique to the APEC, I think, and it reflects the organization commitment to treating non-regional members as well, pretty much equally with the regional economies in the trade and investment, thereby avoiding any of those, kind of exclusiveness. So the procedure principle is also based on the consensus, as I explained earlier, so which emphasizes the importance of members, harmonious, again, the decision-making in all process, and the pursuit of the joint action and the reconciliation of the differences in a gradual or voluntary rather than a coercive manner. So this time, again, this year, U.S. is the host, and they provided the 3 keywords for the upcoming APEC meeting. One is interconnected, and two is innovative, and three is inclusive. So having provided the three I's, again, I think the U.S. is trying to get all these member economies together to think about more like a global issues in an innovative and more inclusive way.
All right, I see your point, Professor Im. Now, Professor Kelly, something that definitely needs to be looked at is, of course, Biden-Xi summit. And the summit would be the first one since November last year in Bali, Indonesia, on the sidelines of the G20. What was discussed then, and how have bilateral ties been up until now?
Yeah, well, I think things have gotten worse, to be perfectly honest, right? Which is to say that the Ukraine war has sort of gone on and on. And I think that is probably the biggest strategic issue in the world right now, right? Because it sort of looks like it's pitting NATO against Russia with sort of Chinese backing behind the Russians, and it sort of has this kind of, sort of Cold War kind of feel to it. And the war has dragged on. Right. I think there was sort of hope in the West that maybe the Ukrainians might win some kind of lightning victory this year. We gave them all this assistance and stuff like that. There's supposed to be some breakthrough over the summer. It didn't happen. Right. And so as long as that war continues, it's going to be hard for the United States and China to close strategic distance on other similar, analogous strategic issues. And it's obviously Taiwan and the South China Sea. And so I think those are the kinds of issues that really the two sides are going to talk about, which is, again, it's kind of ironic because actually that's not really what an APEC is supposed to be, right? APEC is supposed to be like regional trade and open regionalism, as Dr. Lim was saying. And that's actually not really what I think everybody is looking at next week, right? It's actually more about, can the Americans and the Chinese get along, right? Can they keep the economic engine between the two of them moving, or will the strategic issues that are dividing them, sort of pull apart this integration, right? And there's already a lot of pressure in the United States for decoupling, right? It's sort of the hot term in the business community is de-risking, right? Which means sort of like bringing production chains out of China, moving to safer places, moving back to North America or moving to Southeast Asia or India or something like that to sort of get away from the kind of political caprice of the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that's all the kind of stuff that's on the table, right? I mean, can the Americans and the Chinese keep talking, right? And I think on the side, there are some things that they could actually sort of really work on. North Korea, for example, is an obvious one. Climate change is an obvious one. Trade rules, some kind of rules of the road, some kind of like framework for maritime disagreements in the South China Sea, where I think there's a real potential actually for, like the U.S. and China to actually literally like have their ships collide and lead to some kind of incident. My guess is those are the issues that are going to be on the agenda next week. Though I think the U.S.-China bilateral trade relationship is really managed bilaterally rather than channeled through APEC.
All right, I see. So the bilateral ties has been quite worse, but now it seems that they are trying to improve their ties as they, in principle, agreed to hold a summit, right? But Professor Im, the White House confirmed President Biden's plans to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping, yet China is yet to announce Xi's visit to San Francisco. What could be the reason behind this?
Well, certainly the Beijing's response sounds a little subtler, more subtle than the Washington. It seems like, again, according to the Chinese media, they keep emphasizing the Chinese so-called demands, including like addressing security and economic sanctions concerns, while major U.S. media have suggested that the two countries are pretty much likely, as you just mentioned, pretty much likely to cooperate on a range of advanced the dialogue. So we certainly see a kind of temperature gap or perception gap between the Beijing and Washington. As we just discussed last year at the Bali meeting, they agreed that, again, the two leaders of the two countries, they agreed that, we don't want to repeat the new Cold War. So they agreed on the kind of opposition to the upcoming, how would you say, those more like a divided world, like a situation, just like during the Cold War. However, still there are certain kind of reality, including all this trade issues or technology competition. Again, all this hegemonic competition between the two is about the future technology. So it is hard to gain, hard to be stopped by the Biden administration. So certainly they do have, those of kind of hurdles or like obstacles. So that is why probably Chinese reaction is more like a kind of complicated than the Washington.
All right, I see. So I understand that we are seeing perception gap between China and the U.S. But Professor Kelly, Hong Kong's sanctioned head chief executive John Lee is to skip the APEC forum owing to the scheduling issues. And some say this could have been one of the measures agreed upon by the U.S. and China to make it easier to improve the ties. What's your view on this?
Yeah, Hong Kong's a really, really tricky issue for the Americans, right? Because it's pretty clearly under Chinese sovereignty. It's pretty clear that the Chinese Communist Party, particularly under Xi, has been sort of undercutting the deal that was originally designed to protect various Hong Kong freedoms. But there's just not a lot that we can do about that, right? There's just not a great deal that the outside world can do, right? I mean, we're not going to intervene in Hong Kong, right? I mean, we really are kind of subject to, again, to the caprice of the party. The primary constraint actually on the party's behavior in Hong Kong has been fear of driving out all the financial firms, right? A lot of them Western financial firms, like CalPERS and stuff like that, right? They're in Hong Kong, right? And the more the Chinese sort of crack down, the more those firms are going to run away to Tokyo, to Seoul, to Singapore. And that has slowly been happening, right? On issues on something like Taiwan, it's a lot easier for us to actually do defense aid, right? You can actually send out the Navy. There's a gap of water that can be defended and things like that. But there's very, very little that can be done on Hong Kong. And as a result, my sense is the Americans, this is just something that the Americans are probably not going to fight for too much because there's just not a whole lot that can be done. I mean, the Donald Trump administration basically told Xi Jinping, you can do whatever you want, right? And so I think some of this is just kind of cutting our losses, right? This is sort of looking at like, what can we get the Chinese to actually come around, or we might get the Chinese sort of behave better in the South China Sea. I think that's a really big issue, by the way. And maybe we can get the Chinese to sort of back off a little bit on the rhetoric on Taiwan, but we really have no options. There's really nothing we can do to actually like bail out the Hong Kongers, to really aid them, which is really sort of a shame, but there we are. And so I think, this is diplomacy, right? I mean, the Biden people have to sort of pick and choose, about what they can get from the Chinese, and this is just something that we're not going to get. So if the Chinese don't come to the meeting, or if the Hong Kongers don't get to come to the meeting because the Chinese government doesn't want them to come, I don't really think the Americans are really fight about that. There's so many other issues in the relationship.
Right, I see your point. Now, Professor Im, I'd like to tap on the agendas that could be discussed if the summit does take place between Biden and Xi. One of the major talking points would be whether the U.S. would lift or ease de-risking measures, and if China would do the same, lifting its export bans and so on. What would China want, and what is the possibility of U.S. lifting de-risking measures?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, it seems like Beijing's demands is pretty much clear. Again, when Mr. Wang Yi, the foreign minister, Chinese foreign minister, visited Washington recently, he clearly mentioned that, of course, our goal, quote, again, our goal is to return to bilateral relations to a healthy and stable development trajectory as soon as possible. However, at the same time, he also mentioned the two countries must ensure the return to Bali, again, the Bali norms or Bali principles, which includes like, again, the no regime change, no seeking for regime change in China, or no pursuing Cold War, another new Cold War in this era, or not just pursuing, not supporting the Taiwan's independence, those kind of things. So Chinese principles are pretty much clear, and I think these cannot be that much conflicting with the Biden's foreign policy. However, as I mentioned earlier, this strategic rivalry between the two is all about future technology. Who's going to be the dominant player in the field of future technology? So, more like a lighter sanctions might have been it can be discussed lifting or not. However, those the sanctions or like trade regulations related to the future technology like AI or like quantum computing, those kind of things, it might be very much difficult to lift for the Biden administration. And the election is coming too. So certainly those technology competition is, I think, a key factor to determine the U.S.'s again the foreign policy. So there might be again which can make us pretty much skeptical about the result of the bilateral summit, as just Professor Kelly shared his own view.
All right, I see your point. We need to also consider the upcoming election. I see. Well, Professor Kelly, staying on the discussion of export controls, reports say that the U.S. and China could hold rare nuclear arms control talks before the Biden-Xi meeting. Could these talks in any way be part of China's efforts to use them as leverage when discussing export controls and others?
Yeah, I would imagine actually you'll see a Chinese effort at linkage on that, right? I mean, we know the Chinese are starting to modernize their arsenal, which means specifically what that means is they're building more warheads, right? It looks like they're going to try to tap out at somewhere between 1,200 to 1,500. Right now they have something like 600, we think, right? We don't fully know. And they're also building more ICBM silos, which means sort of large land-based missiles. You sort of dig them into the ground. And this is a strategic concern for the United States. The United States is modernizing its own arsenal. In response to this, the Americans are about to spend a great deal of money in the next 25 years modernizing, right? So it looks like we're kind of sliding into a bit of a nuclear arms race, a missile race with the Chinese. And that's not too unexpected. Of course, we did that with the Soviet Union as well during the Cold War. But it would be good if we could control that, right? If we could prevent it. The Chinese and the United States do not currently have an arms control treaty at all. The Chinese do not belong to any of the structures that the Soviets and the Americans built during the Cold War, and the Americans have been talking about this. Has become sort of a bigger and bigger issue in the last 10 years, right? Trying to rope the Chinese into some kind of deal for warhead limitations, throw weight, and things like that. The Chinese have stayed away from that stuff. They've sort of avoided a kind of triangular relationship with us and the Russians to try to come to agreements on these things. And I think that's probably, as you said, I think this is actually one of the things that the Biden people will probably bring up. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Chinese made an effort at linkage, right? Which is the Chinese are very worried about American market access restrictions. China is still primarily an export-dependent economy. Chinese consumers do not consume enough domestically to support Chinese production, right? If China can't export, its economy shrinks, right? And so they need to export. The biggest market of the Americans, they've got to get market access. The U.S. Congress is turning very much against Chinese market access in the United States. TikTok and all that, we're going to make like TikTok illegal in America or something or other. And so if you're China, nuclear weapons, negotiating nuclear weapons caps, which is something the strategic American community really, really wants, right? We don't want the Chinese to build, 1,000 missiles and we get into some arms race, it's like 1960s. And so, this might be a way to get the Chinese to agree to that. I would argue that's actually a good thing, right? I would argue that, China and the United States engaged in a nuclear arms race would be disastrous, and we should offer something substantial to the Chinese to sidetrack that, to derail that.
Right, I cannot agree more, Professor Kelly. Well, Biden-Xi summit is actually very closely related to South Korea's diplomacy as well. And so, Professor Im, from South Korea's point of view, some say the Biden-Xi summit is noteworthy in that improvement in bilateral ties could be a great gateway to a Yoon-Xi summit or even a trilateral summit between Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing. What is your view on this?
Well, in that sense, I also do think this hopefully upcoming, the bilateral summit between the President Biden and the President Xi can be a litmus test, for the further trilateral cooperation among Korea, Japan, and China. Again, for the Korea and Japan, obviously, the China is the #1 trading partner. And for the Korean case, and of course, Japan is deeply directly related to this issue too, but North Korea's nuclear provocations or the threats by the North, and these days, again, as we all know, North is very much close to the Russia, which is very much threatening and which makes the whole situation in this region much more volatile than before. So obviously China's role is, of course, it was already very big, but it's looming larger and larger. So without China's support on their cooperation, it's hard to maintain the stability in this region. So in that sense, I think Tokyo and Seoul do exchange many those discussions, and I think we already got a kind of consensus. So hopefully, again, after the two leaders meet in the San Francisco, again, we can continue all this cooperative manners with within the regional how would you say, those kind of trilateral framework as well. So that's truly what we want to see in the upcoming months.
All right. Well, I hope to see that too, Professor Im. Well, I'd like to ask many more questions to our professors, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Kelly and Professor Im, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
The president also remains committed to boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of this latest.
To discuss the current security environment.
The United Nations most powerful on the ongoing security, expressing hope stock markets around the world have